Hello. So today we're going live with Dr. Lisa Lewis, and then now just waiting for her to come online so I can invite her. And after that, we will start. Hold on, let me invite her. Take your time. Hope everyone is doing well. Can wait for her, and then we will start talking about the psychological aspect today, like motivation and hello. Okay, let me. Hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. I'm just trying to see if I can set my phone down.
No problem.
If I turn it, I don't. Oh, yeah, it will. There we go. Does that look okay on your end?
Yeah, it's okay on my end.
Okay,
Okay.
good.
Just you are what's this angle? What's this is
Oh,
vertical?
so I'm sitting on my side. Okay, hold
Yeah.
on. Let's see. There we go.
Okay. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
How are things at home for you all?
Things are good. Yeah, we are, as you know, we are dealing with a pandemic, so they're strange times, but things are okay. We're working and doing the best we can.
Hmm. I guess this at this time is still much in the sense of practice. Like it's much easier for your line of work as compared to Tony's, right? As
Yes. So for me, I can see clients and patients online, and I
hmm.
also teach some classes. I greatly prefer to be in person, but I can teach online. So I haven't been not able to do anything, which has been nice. I mean, I love being live and in person, but I'm grateful that I can continue working. I think there's probably a lot of fitness professionals out there though who really don't like doing virtual work and really miss being in the gym.
Yeah, I mean, like I was saying that it's for some exercise it's very hard to teach, especially the new client. Like you
Yeah.
teach a kettlebell deadlift or a Romanian deadlift, you're like
Hmm.
it's back. You can only like, and they're like, I don't feel it. Like
That's
I want
right.
to take over and teach you.
That's
Yeah.
right. So I just to lose that ability to cue in person and to put hands on, I think really makes it challenging.
Mhm. All right. So I guess like the first one would be like, I mean, like, can I get you to introduce yourself, or why did you get into psychology?
Sure. So my name is Lisa Lewis. I'm a licensed psychologist. I have been practicing psychotherapy, which is basically talking to someone
Hmm.
um, for treatment since 2003. So I started with a master's degree in clinical psychology and was a counselor. I have a specialty in substance abuse. I worked in addiction work for quite a while. I have a doctoral degree in counseling and sports psychology. And while I was obtaining that degree, my dissertation focused on exercise motivation. So I really developed this strong interest in what motivates people to take good care of their bodies and their health and to be physically active regularly. And so now today I work for myself. I have a private practice where I see some patients who have anxiety, depression, history of trauma, eating disorder, but then I have much more of my practice are clients who don't necessarily have a mental health condition, but they want to improve their life. So some of them are athletes, some of them are executives, some of them are fitness professionals who are just seeking to really do their best work to achieve higher heights, to
Mm.
recruit their strengths, to help them evolve. And then I teach a little bit at a local university, and I do some writing and a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And then workshops, much like what we're doing right
Mm.
now. So that's my background and what got me into psychology. I cannot remember a time when I was not interested in psychology.
Mm.
So I think when I was a child, I was very interested in forensic psychology, and when I was a teenager, I thought maybe I would work for the FBI,
Mm.
be a profiler. And then as I just got more and more engaged with psychology and saw all these different ways that psychology can be a profession, I kind of combined my passions for sports and exercise and fitness with psychology. And that is, you know, the very abridged version of how I ended up where I am today.
Because I've also been thinking about taking up psychology recently. Because
Mm-hmm.
it's like trying to, after a while you're like, okay, what are the different forms of like motivational stuff you can do with a client, right? I mean especially now I think there's so many, which I'm gonna ask you about. Like there's motivational interviewing, there's CBT, there's self-determination theory, there's all these different forms.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And okay, NLP depends how people view it, but you know, all these different modalities, and like,
That's right.
so like, I mean, like, okay, since we already from your line of work as like in psychology, like, would you mind there's a short explanation of like all the different ones? Like, let's start with like motivational interviewing. Like, what would you say? What's that?
Mm-hmm. So motivational interviewing is a style of communication that
Mm-hmm.
focuses on the individual's problem as they see it.
Mm-hmm.
It views the client or the individual as the one who has all the answers, as the expert, and as the leader, which is different than viewing the coach or the therapist as the leader. So it puts the client in charge. It is client-centered. And motivational interviewing is a style of communication that keeps the client's goals, the client's priorities front and center. And the person who's the coach really is a guide, more like a Sherpa, kind of helping them unpack what their goals are, to identify what are the barriers that might get in their way, what are the interventions they can use to clear those barriers or obstacles out of their way. Motivational interviewing started as a counseling style for smoking cessation and then for substance abuse. But now there are so many applications for motivational interviewing. It's used in doctor's offices. It's used in all kinds of healthcare appointments. It's used in addiction, as you know. It's used in nutrition. It's used in fitness. So it really, and I think people should be, you know, using these kinds of skills even in communication with their partners or their children. It's just a really excellent way to talk. And what I like about it is it's not highly structured. So whoever you are, you can use these skills in a really authentic way, using the way you already communicate or what your strengths already are. So it's not necessarily a theory. It is like an application of a theory. So you mentioned self-determination theory. Another theory is stages of change, you know, how people make change. So motivational interviewing just draws from theories like that and says, okay, now here's how to do that with your words.
And then we'll go through self-determination theory.
Yeah. So self-determination theory is a theory of motivation. It's called a meta theory because there's a lot of moving parts to it. But essentially, the core of self-determination theory is that within all human beings, there is this organic, what they call organismic desire to want to grow and evolve and learn and gain mastery over our environment. So even if you think about somebody who has a habit like they love to do Sudoku puzzles or crossword puzzles, there's no external outcome. You know, they don't win anything. They don't get anything out of that, but they still enjoy the process of doing it and of getting good at it. So that is something that is intrinsic to humans. And that's kind of one of the underlying premises of self-determination theory. And essentially, Dietschy and Ryan, who are the kind of the fathers of self-determination theory, assert that there are different ways in which individuals are motivated. There are some external factors that can motivate people to do things. They want some kind of end result. So their behavior is a means to an end. And then there's intrinsic motivation, which is the behavior or what they're doing is the end itself, just the act of, so for some people, just the act of going for a run or having a good lift, like that's what they want, the experience. They're not as focused on the outcome of that, which might be fat loss or hypertrophy or what have you. So what I like about self-determination theory is that there's this myriad of ways that people can be motivated. You don't have to change the way they're motivated. You got to work with what they've got. You got to meet them where they're at. So what I mean by that is if you have a client who comes in and they're motivated because they want fat loss, but you want them to be motivated because you want them to like love health and fitness and aspire to greater heights, your motive is not as important as their motive, because their motive is what can actually fuel them right in the here and now. So you want to access their motivation. And so I'm trying to provide a short answer, but I will say, Melvin, that I have a whole 13-hour course that is about self-determination, motivational interviewing, and stages of change. So I'm giving these like really short answers for something that I could go on and on and on about. But is this helpful to try to articulate in these brief ways?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
So, all right. Then also, okay, like especially during these periods of time with the pandemic and everything, right? Like, do you see a lot, like, or do you have a lot of clients that are like kind of like losing motivation in doing a lot of this stuff, and like how would you like help with supporting them in the motivational sense?
Yeah. So, and part of my belief system is so rooted in self-determination theory that I don't necessarily think people lose motivation. I think their motives change and their priorities change. So people will say like, I've lost motivation, but really if they're home with their kids all day and they've sat in front of the computer all day and they've been eating snacks all week, their motives have just changed. There's barriers that are in the way. It's not that the motivation is gone. But absolutely, positively, I hear many clients say this. And I also, work with some fitness professionals. So I will hear them say, my clients are all saying they've lost motivation. And for sure, I heard the other day on the news a statistic that the average American has gained 16 pounds since the beginning of the year when the pandemic really took hold. So people's behaviors are changing dramatically. I think it is a matter of communicating with the individual about their specific life, about what their goals are, and really getting in the weeds with them about what opportunities they have to be physically active, to practice whatever nutritional habits feel reasonable for them. And maybe they're not going to get back to super high level fitness or super tight macronutrient, tracking that they were doing pre-COVID. But there's probably somewhere in between that and just laying on the couch eating Oreos. You know what I mean? So I think it's about negotiating with clients and helping them to think about what's reasonable for them in light of everything that's going on. And also to be thinking about, how are the ways that I can take care of myself and what are the things that are motivating me? So for example, I was recently working with a mom who has been home with 3 children for a long time and really didn't feel like she could ask for any time to herself. And so after a couple of sessions of us talking, she asked her husband, she said, I need like 90 minutes. And so being able to do that in the morning, she was able to go down to the basement and get a training session in. Not every day, but multiple days a week. And just making that change helped her to, number 1, get some training in, number 2, to feel good about that, and then number 3, be more motivated to knock off the snacking in the afternoon because she didn't want to like undo, the benefits of the training she had in the morning. So even little things can make a big difference, I think, right now, because people are feeling so off track. Just shifting one thing and opening up in one way to give them more of what they want, I think can really have a lot of benefit.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, especially like I think one thing I like to do is tell, like, let's say if the person likes Starbucks, right? It's not like once you reach your goal, all the Starbucks outlets are going to close the day you reach your goal. It's like it's still going to be there, even if there's one Starbucks that closes every day, unless you take a few years to get there, it's still going to be there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then, so like coming from that, like where do you see, like, I mean, using dieting as an example, right? Like,
okay.
Why do you see so many people like falling off the bandwagon or like going off track? Is it a very big like psychological thing apart from the hormonal stuff?
Well, I think everything's a psychological thing. That's my bias. But this is a once in a 2 generation situation that we are in. Everybody's life, everybody's habits, whether they were working on them or they were automatic, has been disrupted. So people have fallen off the bandwagon because the bandwagon got tipped over by something really intense. I think it is important for us, even if we want our clients to get back on track or if we want the best for them, it's still important to recognize and validate that some serious stuff just went down in the world and will be affecting us for years to come. So I think it's important to recognize that and to be able to say to clients like, of course you were not able to continue or of course you fell off the bandwagon. Like, look at what is going on. I think often people helpers reflex is to want to minimize or say like, but you can still, they want to hold on to that empowered attitude. And I'm not saying you want to disempower your clients, but I'm saying if you can help your clients recognize and validate that something really intense that is a huge deal that happens once every 100 to 150 years just happened and rocked everybody's world, it just helps them to say like, yeah, okay, I'm not the worst, most laziest person ever. I'm a human being. And now that that's happened and I really miss my healthy habits of not snacking, or I really miss my habits of going for a walk every day, I want to get back to some of those things. So I think just acknowledging and validating, what it does is it just clears those things out of the way so you don't have to spend time arguing about them, minimizing them, your client's guilt around them. You can just get that out of the way, and then you can get back to the business of what are we going to do here and now in light of all this craziness that is going on, that you think will help you and serve you in your goals.
And so kind of like staying on track. Like, okay, so you're saying that staying on track, like a lot of people like to compare themselves against others, or like, do you think that people need to compare themselves against one another, or what's your thoughts on comparisons?
Yeah, so comparison is part of the human condition. Even if I said comparison is no good, people would do it because people do it. And to a certain extent, that has benefit because it gives you something to bounce off of. It's a way to get feedback. What I encourage people to do is to be judicious with how much feedback they are seeking out and to consider the source. So for example, if you are following things on Instagram or on Facebook or in other avenues of social media, and the material offers you educational information, it provides you with feedback that makes you feel competent, that makes you feel empowered, that helps you to want to strive for more in a positive way, that's good. If you are following stuff on if you are following stuff on Instagram and getting feedback that makes you feel lazy, fat, bad about yourself, not good enough, if you're looking at it and reading it and you are doing this, that is information that is not a helpful social comparison for you. And I think people disregard that feedback. I think that, they're reading something or they're looking at something and they're not feeling good, but they don't listen to that information. And that is important information. And even if you think, oh, well, I've gained weight and I deserve to feel bad, that's a judgment. This is like a criticism of self that really has nothing to offer you. There's no productivity that can come out of being negative towards yourself. I think some individuals think if I feel guilty and I feel bad and I look at how bad I look compared to other people, that will really motivate me. No, it will not. It will make you feel bad. It will disempower you. It will slow you down. And it may actually lead to you eating more or checking out more or being more sedentary. So I think seeking out ways for social comparison that bring you up is what people should be paying attention to. Does this help me and move me forward, or does this hold me back and get me stuck?
So because a lot of this is all on like the social influence, right? Like magazines, books, or like females be at size 0 or a certain kind of like things like that. Do you think that it has a very, very big influence on I guess females in general, let's say, example, versus males, right? So.
Well, I think females are really socialized to compare against a societal standard that is one type of way. I definitely think men have to deal with their own. In the last 25 years, unfortunately, men have really caught up to women in terms of being held to this standard of like lots of hypertrophy and chiseled abs and all of this, nonsense. But women have been dealing with this nonsense for decades and decades and centuries, basically. And the standard that has been popular for quite some time is someone who is very lean, if not underweight. And even though we've seen that image change from somebody who's twiggy and very skinny to someone who has some muscle on them, it still is this image of somebody who's quite lean. And there are some people who, because of their genetics and because of their metabolism, that is within the realm of healthy behaviors in order to achieve that. But there's lots of women for which it is not in their best interest to pursue that kind of body mass. And so because a lot of the images that women see around them tend to be this one particular type, they develop over time, not consciously, but over time, this idea that the way to look good or the way to look right or the way I should look is this quite lean image of a woman. And I do think that this is changing. I think we're seeing more diversity in terms of models that are out there and colors of people who are out there and different shapes and types. But still overall, when we're looking on social media or in magazines or on television, we're seeing folks who are quite lean. So I just think the amount of exposure is still very, very high in comparison to the percentage of exposure we all hear as girls and then women about, there's a right way for you. There's a healthiest way for you to be in terms of your body composition and your size and your shape. And that's not necessarily the same as the lady who is modeling some clothes, on page 7 of your magazine.
So back to the dieting aspect, since I think majority of the time people face the most problems with dieting is compared to, how would, let's say if somebody relatively new were to come see you and says that they face problems with dieting, for example, or to a diet, what would be your general recommendations or like?
Yeah, I don't make general recommendations because by the time a person has come to me with that kind of an issue, they have been working on it for a long time and they have a lot of expertise about things that work for them and don't. So what I try to do is learn all the expertise that they have. So I'll say like, let's say they say, I've been trying to diet for this long, or I lost this amount of weight and then I gained it back and I just really want help getting back on track. I'll say, tell me more. Tell me what worked, tell me what didn't, so that I can get an understanding for what were the barriers, what are the client's strengths, like what are things they're really good at. So for example, I have some clients who like the food that they eat is amazing. The nutritional value of the selection that they make and the diversity they make is really fabulous. But they have difficulty with snacking or eating at night. I have other clients who they really don't eat very much volume of food, but the foods that they eat have low nutritional quality. So they don't really have a problem with snacking. They have a problem with choice. So I want to hear what is going on for that individual. I think, just to give somebody a general, here's a food plan. I mean, there are lots of people out there who do that. There is probably a small segment of the population who's going to take that food plan and apply it and like it and continue it. But for most people, that's not how they work. They want autonomy. They want choice. There are some behaviors that are easier for them or harder for them. And so if clients want consistency and sustainability, it really needs to be tailored to what their specific goals are, what's hard for them, what's easy for them, what their limitations are. So I know that is the opposite of the answer that you wanted, but I guess my general recommendation would be to learn to get to know where the client is at and what their strengths and weaknesses are, and then try to apply those.
Yeah, sure. I understand, because like same thing like training, right? You want to make the specific, it's for exercises for a specific client. Everything is all tailored to the person. So if there's one like psychological thing that let's say mistake that most people make in dieting, like where do you think that one mistake normally is at?
I think it's negativity and this idea of like punishing oneself, of like, I'm not going to eat any of this, and let's say there's a client who just really loves popcorn. I've heard this a couple, like, no more popcorn. Stop eating the popcorn at night. It's like they treat themselves like they develop this like inner parent of a 15-year-old, and by like grounding them and taking away everything they enjoy, that's going to get the results that they want. And actually the opposite is true. So it is treating yourself with respect and helping to enjoy food. So if you could enjoy what you're eating, and you could be excited about your meal and be sated physically and psychologically, you probably will not need to go back to the kitchen 15 times to eat more. And so I think with men, but especially with women, there's a lot of damaging ways of talking and thinking about food that get women into trouble when they're in adulthood, because they think about good foods and bad foods, and they think about being good or being bad. And that I think is a huge mistake that people get into. And then that sometimes as coaches or people helpers, we kind of even involuntarily kind of like join them on that train. So I will always stop my client and be like, time out. You know, there's not a good food or a bad food. You're not good or bad, you know, because you ate something delicious or because you know, ate nothing that was exciting to you for 10 days in a row. You are a human being and food is calories. So let's talk about how you can create a relationship that makes you feel happy and sated, where there's no like punishment and guilt and shame tied into that.
And do you, okay, so like, have you had such things like, or such things where people are focused on just hypertrophy? Like, do these apply across to hypertrophy too, or muscle building?
That's a harder question because a lot of the people that I work with have trouble with their eating, so they are wanting to get leaner.
No worries. Then we go with just like personal trainers, and like you mentioned that because I saw you also have the course for personal trainers, right? So what are the things, like, since personal trainers will be watching this also, like what are the number one psychological recommendations or mistakes you think like personal trainers will make for themselves?
Yeah.
Business wise, I guess.
Yeah, and I won't. As opposed to a mistake, I think the primary thing that I notice about personal trainers is that they are very caring and psychologically minded and actually have a lot of psychology skills, a lot of understanding of human nature, and this real passion or desire to make change in people's life. Mm-hmm. So I think there's all of this positive intention, but there's not much education and support around how psychologically taxing this work can be, how frustrating it can be to have clients come to you and say, okay, help me, change me, and then to fight back and don't do anything you say, you know, or say they're doing it and they're not telling the truth, or, you know, so it's psychologically very tricky waters. Most personal trainers that I've met really care and really want to make a difference and can really be drained or negatively impacted by how difficult it is to do this work to help people change. So I think first, what I just want to underscore is this work is hard. It probably was not part of most people's education to learn about psychology, motivation, behavior change, but now you're doing this work and you're thinking about these things all the time. Number two, there probably isn't much place for support for you. So, you know, I'm a therapist. It's very common and regular for me to have peer supervision where I talk to a colleague about, you know, the stresses that I'm dealing with in my work. It's normal for me to have a supervisor where I sit down and talk about clients who are really hard and draining for me, and then what do I do about this client, and just to spend time on that. But for personal trainers, I don't think there's much room for them to be talking about how taxing the psychological work is. I see that there's room for learning about sets and reps and kinesiology and physiology, but the psych piece, I really feel like a lot of personal trainers are kind of on their own with something that you cannot be on your own with. So, so then I think this affects individuals in different ways. So there's some coaches who just give all of themselves and get really drained, and they're like texting and emailing with their clients all hours of the day or night, and they don't have room for themselves or their own self-care. So they get their butts kicked. And then I see other coaches who get really kind of cold and angry, you know, with their clients, and are just always kind of have a chip on their shoulder, and that's not good either. And so both of those kinds of trainers, I can see they can get burnt out and want to leave the industry, because both of those attitudes can lead to client turnover, not even enjoying the work, it's just not working out. When in the beginning they went in with the best of intentions. So I think for personal trainers, having some kind of space in their life where they're either learning about psychology or they're able to talk and process about all of the psychological work that they are doing, all of the caretaking that they are doing with their clients can really help to sustain them and rejuvenate them and keep them being effective and really caring and connected with their clients.
And how would you recommend a trainer to tell their client? Like sometimes, like the client's not telling you the truth about their calorie, their food intake, right? So they're trying to get it out, but like either it's a forceful interaction between both. Once you're trying to say that your client's lying, but the client says they're not. So what would your recommendations be?
So your clients are lying. You do not need to know what they're eating. You do not need to get into a tug of war with them about telling the truth. It is up to them to get honest with themselves. And so what happens, I think, in an interaction is, let's say you start working with a client, they're not being compliant or they're not being truthful. And they're saying, well, here's my food log. Why aren't I losing weight? And I think what we want to do as people helpers is jump into, well, what's not on here? What are you not saying? We want them to take ownership, but if they're not ready, they're not ready. And so the most effective thing to do is to say to them, I wonder what could be getting in the way. I wonder what else could be going on. It looks like by this food log that you should be in caloric deficit, but you're not losing weight. So you're not in caloric deficit. And it may take your clients days, weeks, months, years to get real with themselves and get ready to change. You can be supportive. You can reflect to them what you see. You can challenge them to look deeper, but you cannot make them change. And as much as we want to help people change, and we have a lot of tools and a lot of knowledge to help people change, we cannot force it. And when you engage and challenge your client, what you're either going to do is cause them to lie more, double down, push back, or drop out. What you want them to do is to get more, the way that we get more and more and more like frustrated, we want them to have that feeling, because that is the energy, that's the gas they need to change. So we kind of want our clients to get sick and tired of being sick and tired. If they get aggravated enough and they get frustrated enough, eventually they're going to say, you know what, I was getting up at 2 a.m. and, eating a bunch of chicken and then getting in the peanut butter jar, and I wasn't putting that on my tracker. Whether they say that to you or they just get real with themselves, if that was happening, they may need a lot more frustration than you need for them to get ready to change. And so I would not recommend getting focused on making the client tell you the truth. I would focus on continuing to reflect and mirror back to the client as best you can what you see, and where the discrepancies lie between what their goals are and then what they're reporting or what their behaviors are.
Yeah, there's this quote, I don't remember the full thing, but it's something like, until the pain, it's more painful staying the same that you make changes.
Right. And that goes right back to motivational interviewing. Motivational interviewing is all about harnessing that ambivalence. It's like, on one hand, I want to change. On the other hand, I do not want to change. And the more they feel that pressure, the more they feel that pull, that is the energy that's going to help them change. When you take that away by taking it on, by pushing back against them, by encouraging them to make one decision or the other, you take the energy away from them. It actually can cause them to lose steam. Yeah.
So since it, for, let's say then, for people or trainers, people that want to start learning a little bit more about, let's say, psychology, or what you can use, let's say, for yourself or for trainers, what would be some of the basic recommendations or sources that you can, that you have?
Resources for trainers?
Okay, let's say trainers first, yeah.
Okay, so resources for personal trainers. There is a book called Motivational Interviewing in Nutrition and Fitness. I think it's great. I think Clifford is the primary author on that book. The self-determination theory has a website, selfdeterminationtheory.org. And you can go there to look at research, other kinds of literature that's free. You can look at whatever the most recent books are, publications in that area. The trans-theoretical model of change, I think every people helper should be familiar with that. And you can Google that, and there's some great videos on YouTube that sort of walk you through what the stages of change are. I really think that these are the three primary pillars for people who are trying to help other people change. And so in saying all of that, that's essentially what my course is. Like Skills for Fit Pros is these three primary pillars. And what I've done is metabolized, literature and theory and research, and then boiled it down to here's how it applies to people who are helping people change in the fitness space. So those are my biases. This summer, I actually have been spending more time in the positive psychology field. So resiliency, character strengths, gratitude, mindfulness, grit, hardiness, the psychological positive aspects, I think is another place that fitness professionals can go. And so the University of Pennsylvania has a positive psychology center with a lot of free information, a lot of free like assessments and online tests that people can take. And that's another, I think, really fabulous resource, particularly now when people are feeling downtrodden or defeated or negatively. I think positive psychology has a lot to offer.
Do you think personal trainers don't view psychology or even psychologists as a very positive image? Or there's more embrace towards psychology, right? That sometimes, especially if you work in the government sector, like if you say you're going to see a psychologist, it's not viewed very positively.
So there's a stigma. I think the stigma you're describing, I think it's changing. It does definitely still exist. And I can see, I've gotten to travel to different states, different countries, different continents to do speaking engagements and workshops. And I can really see pretty quickly what people's stigma is around what it means to see a psychologist. There are still some places who view it as only crazy people engage in that. But I think that's really changing as wellness becomes more popular and self-care becomes something that we talk about more and more. I see more consulting psychologists and exercise psychologists and sports psychologists move into spaces that are not just about treating illness, but are about enhancing wellness. So I do think that that's in flux. And of course, again, I'm biased because I'm talking to audiences who want to hear from me. So I'm, in a way, I'm sort of preaching to the choir often. But, what I will hear trainers say to me is like, how do I find a therapist in my neighborhood that I could refer clients to? Or how could I talk to a client about maybe you should see a therapist without making them feel like I think that they're crazy or that I'm rejecting them? And those are really important conversations to have because it's about destigmatizing what that means and making it more of a part of wellness than a reflection of illness or something that's wrong.
And then we've been speaking about dieting, the mental and psychological aspect, right? How is it very different from, let's say, athletic performance?
Well, it's very different from athletic performance, right? So what you're aiming at just completely changes. I mean, for some people, being lean improves their athletic performance. There are some sports where that's just, part of it. But for clients where the focus is on being powerful, on having more endurance, it shifts the focus. And actually, I think when working with women, it shifts it in a positive way because the discussion is around how to add as opposed to how to subtract. So it is very common for me to work with athletes who are struggling in their sports performance or in their body's physical health because they're not eating enough or they're not eating appropriately. And so really the ambivalence for them is, on the one hand, they want to be skinny, but on the other hand, they want to be the best athlete they can possibly be. And they feel that those two goals are in conflict with one another. So it really is important, I think, with athletes to have them clearly identify what is priority number one. And if they're athletes, they're going to say the sport. And so then you've got some leverage So for example, I was recently working with a professional female hockey player who really wanted to recover from some chronic injuries she had, really wanted to be able to be on the ice as long as possible during games. And so when she would start getting in this place of wanting to create a caloric deficit, wanting to like punish herself by skipping meals and stuff, we always had this touchstone to go back to of, you want to be on the ice as long as you possibly can, and you don't want to be sidelined again by another stress fracture or by another injury. What do you need to do to achieve that primary goal? And she would say, I need to eat. I need to eat the food. So I don't know if this is specifically what you were asking about when you asked this question, but I think for athletes, there's this added good leverage of the better nutritional quality you have, the better you're eating your food, the better you're gonna be able to perform. And there's a real clear linear. I recently was working with a runner who, I mean, since 7th grade has been not taking care of her nutrition. And so when she started eating, eating sufficiently, she really couldn't argue with how much better she felt. It really was like, no matter how much of her thoughts were around not wanting to get fat, like she could not argue that she was a better runner when she was eating properly.
And so one more is that, let's say, back to dieting again. So if you're trying to get your support from, let's say, your family members, like, how would you initiate such a conversation with them?
If an individual needs support from their family, you mean like to have better food choices in the home, or? Yeah. I mean, I would just confront it head on, or I would talk to my clients about, what can you say to your parents, to your significant other, to your kids? I would almost do like a role play, like, what would you say? What would they say, to kind of help them create a script for that. I would have them identify what would be hard about that, what would have to change. So sometimes clients will feel like, if I ask my husband, not to have any ice cream in the house, that's not fair to him. So then we just unpack that. Like, what do you mean it's not fair to him? And like, could he go get some ice cream? We just try to unpack it and see where there might be some maybe overly rigid styles of thinking that we could maybe loosen up to help people.
Got it. So now we're gonna ask stuff about you. So like, how? I mean, like with is the gym still closed for you guys over there?
Well, my husband owns a little studio, so we've been able to use that throughout the pandemic and on a pretty regular basis. Yeah.
I was scrolling through. I saw the one where you guys had to bench press, and Tony was still with the crutches. All right, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So he had crutches and was really not able to put any weight on his foot. Yeah. So we've actually been training together pretty consistently since March, when the pandemic really started to affect the U.S.
Because I know it's 51 different states, right? Is there any like news about like the gyms opening back soon?
Yeah,
for you guys?
yeah. So gyms have been opening different times in different states. I think for many of the states, personal training is possible. I think for some of the bigger gyms, I do think in some of the hot spots around the country, some of them are closed. Some of them are opened with restriction in terms of how many people can be in the space and social distancing and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of variation right now.
Yeah, because it's hard, right? Like 51 different governments, 51. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So like a few questions I want to ask you personally. Like will you be very busy over the next few months?
Will I be very busy? I think so. Yeah. What makes you ask that?
Because I'm looking at creating a product like a online virtual summit for females. Like like includes we cover topics like psychology, nutrition, training, stuff like that. Yeah, and hormonal health. So like just trying to get like 2 to 3 speakers to speak about each topic, and then it's pre-recorded, so it doesn't need to be live because everybody has like a different time zone. And
yeah.
Everybody's time zone will be the hardest. So just to see if, let's say, maybe in this is July, right? Maybe like September or October, just like if you'll be free for something like that.
I think if it was pre-recorded and it was, time limited, I could probably figure out a way to get it in.
Okay.
But yeah, maybe you and I can talk more about it.
Sure.
Because once September rolls around and I'm teaching, things get really, really busy.
Okay.
Yeah. So that being said, Melvin, I am out of time for today. Is there anything else that you want to touch base about before we say bye?
That's all.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Come say hi to Tony.
I will. Yep. Bye, Melvin.
Bye. Thank you for coming.
You're welcome. Talk to you soon.
Bye. Thank you, everybody. Hope you enjoyed yourself and learned something new. If not, where you have. Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.